Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.
Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. In 2019, the Home Ministry revoked Aatish Taseer's overseas citizenship of India by tweet even before he was officially informed. The government's pretext was that he had concealed the fact that his father was Pakistani. Is that the full truth? Or was it a vindictive act against an outspoken critic of Prime Minister Modi? Now, what does the loss of his overseas citizenship mean for Aatish Taseer? In the introduction of his latest book, and here it is, A Return to Self, Excursions in Exile, Aatish Taseer has written about this, very possibly for the first time. In a moment, Aatish Taseer will join me live from New York. Aatish Taseer, let me start with the Modi government's decision in 2019 to strip you of your overseas citizenship of India. You're right, the pretext the government used was that I had concealed the Pakistani origins of my father. But had you in fact concealed the fact that your father, Salman Taseer, was Pakistani?
Well, I'd written a book about it, so I was certainly hiding in plain sight, as they might say. But moreover, my father's name was on the document, and it was my mother, by the way, who did the initial application. And she says, or she claims that she was completely forthright with them. They told her it was not an issue. And it was a PIO, you have to remember. I was 17 or 18 when I first got that status. And then it was carried over to an OCI. And short of writing a book and countless articles, and remember, all of this was known in the senior leadership of the BJP. L.K. Advani had read Stranger to History and loved it. Ram Madhav was a huge fan of my work. And the Prime Minister right now is calling my mother to commiserate about my stepfather having a stroke. So all of this is happening in real time, and everything is known and in the public. So you can see that there was a kind of air of malice around the whole thing.
In fact, as you mentioned, in 1999, when your mother, Tavleen Singh, applied on your behalf for a PIO card, which in 2005 automatically became an overseas citizenship of India, the rules did not make it compulsory or even make you ineligible because one of your parents was Pakistani. That rule, I believe, came into being somewhere around 2015, 2016. So when you got your PIO card, and when that became overseas citizenship in 2005, you were not ineligible on the grounds your father was Pakistani. Am I right?
That's what my mother's told me. Honestly, it's a completely Byzantine bureaucracy where rules were added. And by the way, the OCI card, not even because of the BJP, it has all kinds of rules. Apparently, if you go mountaineering, you're ineligible and you violated the PIO card. So the whole thing it's a tortuous bureaucracy. This was what I heard from my mother. And my situation was unusual. You know, I was the child of a Pakistani politician who had left politics. I'd grown up in India. You were witness to my upbringing in India. And I'd grown up completely enmeshed in Indian life. And so none of this was really like it was not part of my worldview at all. I went to Pakistan as a 21-year-old and met my father. We had a very difficult, short relationship, and then he was killed. And this is, these were special circumstances.
Just to clarify, the Wall Street Journal, I take it, is therefore incorrect when it says Mr. Taseer was deprived of an Indian right he should not have had in the first place. At the time you became a PIO, a person of Indian origin, which then became OCI status, Overseas Citizen of India status, you had every right to get that status. The rule that debarred someone if one of their parents were Pakistani came into being long after you got your PIO, long after it transitioned into OCI status.
This is what I've heard from my mother. This is what I believe to be true. To tell you the truth, if I'm ambushed by some little bureaucratic detail that sort of tilts the case the other way, I'm not surprised. My case was certainly special. But what you have to do is see it in the view of, I was a test case, Karan. And after that, they've come on, after almost 150 people. The most cruel case of all is Ashok Swain, who won his right to have his OCI in court, and then they put a travel ban on him, depriving him the right to see his mother. So this is we're talking about a vicious, vindictive government that was using me as as an early test case so that they could actually do this in a far more naked, sort of bare-teethed way to other people. And I don't want us to lose a bigger picture, because, it isn't the story of one person. It's the story of a kind of terror that's been put on the Indian diaspora, and that's been very effective, because that weaponization of citizenship document, which is now happening in this country too, is one of the most terrifying ways to kind of destabilize people, to produce a kind of uncertainty, to have people fall silent. And that's really, in my opinion, the larger story.
But for a moment, let me stick to your story, because I'm talking to you. As the Wall Street Journal also concedes, you've been treated vindictively. Do you believe that stripping you of your OCI status was retribution for the fact that you had done a critical cover story on Narendra Modi for Time magazine, and the magazine had called it India's divided in chief? Were they getting back at you?
Of course. And they have a record now at getting back at so many other people. So of course they were getting back at me. And, it's not just that I lost the OCI. They won't give me a simple tourist visa. My grandmother, who raised me, died without being able to see me. My stepfather had a stroke in November. My mother is in her 70s. The prime minister will call her to condole with her about these things, and he's at the same time depriving her of seeing her son, her only son, as she gets into her 70s. So all of it it's systematically cruel, and absolutely, like, it was retribution. And everyone saw it as such. And by the way, this process, the fact that it happened through the Home Ministry, the fact that Amit Shah was kind of leading this, is testament to the fact that it was coming from a different place. And that's why when everyone has tried to get me a visa or reached out or whatever, they've always realized that the person behind it is Amit Shah. And so very much retribution and part of a pattern.
And it's also true that you found out about it from a tweet long before you were officially informed.
So I think an Indian news portal, The Print, had got hold of the story, and they broke the story, and the secretary of the Home Ministry jumped on Twitter and canceled an official document like this on Twitter before I'd received the formal communication. And then the External Affairs Ministry or the embassy here had to rush to send me official paperwork, because you see, that was a sort of Trumpy brutality of the whole thing, was cancel the document on Twitter. And then they were saying things like, why did you keep this name? So a big part of it was, if he'd been Aatish Singh, well, then you would have seemed like a Hindu, and that would have, or a Sikh, and that would have made it easier for you. So the whole thing was edged also with a kind of ethno-nationalism and very ugly.
And a clear dislike for the fact that you retained a Muslim surname.
Who names themselves? My mother gave me this name. And so it was, I'm sure it was part of wanting her for her to know who I was. I'd grown up with a child, I'd grown up, out of wedlock with an estranged father. So she was probably trying to protect me. But anyway, I think that like that to introduce that element, it's another way to kind of dog whistle that this person is not just, he's a Muslim, he's a Pakistani, he's an outsider, an alien. And they've been very successful in, I had a huge contribution to Indian writing, to Indian letters. All of that has been tarnished. I've been made to seem like a kind of somebody suspect. And that Saviano has this lovely thing that in the fascists of the 30s, they would destroy your body, but the fascists today, they first destroy your reputation. And that's exactly what happened to me.
Let's at this point, Aatish, go a little back in the story. I want to talk to you about what India used to mean to you. When you returned after university in America, I gather that you were very conscious that you belonged to an elite section of the country, a section that was cut off, if not divorced from the majority, and you made a great attempt to learn Hindi, Urdu, Sanskrit. You traveled widely to immerse yourself in the country. At that time, did this reflect a great desire to belong, to be a part of India as you saw the country?
Yes, and also I lived with this terrible fear of the precarity at which the English-speaking classes of India, the westernized classes, lived in relation to the country at large. I felt that there was a cultural gap that was the legacy of colonization, and that there would be a political backlash. And so in a sense, that thing that we say sometimes in this country about Trump being the wrong answer to the right question, I felt that very much with somebody like Modi. I was like, this is something that someone is going to exploit politically. And I felt as a writer, somebody who wanted to be very much part of a national literature writing into an Indian moment, that I had to be able to bridge that gap, that I had to be able to dramatize these distances that our history had left us at. It was nobody's fault. But I felt that there would be political retribution if those distances weren't bridged. And so much of my effort in learning Sanskrit and learning Hindi and Urdu, in working with translation, was I suppose an effort to better belong and to be better equipped to be a writer in India at this particular moment. And I don't think I was wrong.
But it also involved your making sacrifices. You say, I killed off aspects of myself in order to better fit back into Indian life. For example, one of the things you pushed into the background is your knowledge of French. It was therefore a conscious sacrifice that you were making to become, how shall I put it, more Indian, to become truly Indian.
I shrank myself. I felt that was a kind of, India can provincialize you, and I think that one of the sadnesses is that my abilities as a traveler, my ability to reach into Southeast Asia, my ability to travel in the Muslim world, to be in Europe, to be in South America, to understand these layers of history and to understand historical controversy, so much of that is part of a natural Indian cosmopolitanism. It was part of what Tagore could do. It was part of what Jinnah could do. And suddenly in modern India, one felt one had to be quite small to fit in, and obviously a major part of cutting away that side of oneself was also sexuality. I'm married to a man now here and very happy and have a very full life. But I felt that I had to kind of deny all of that because if it would make me more marginal in India, and I didn't want to be more marginal. And then suddenly, like when this shock of India kind of saying, not just the government, but, a chorus of voices of hate saying, be on your way, you kind of outsider, you alien, you sort of foreigner. I suddenly felt, I was like, well, I'm free now. I can be myself, I don't have to make myself so small to belong.
I'll come to that sense of relief and freedom which you write about, and it's a very striking moment in the introduction of this book, and I'll hold out the book once again so that the audience can see it. But before I come to that, what then did it mean to you when your overseas citizenship was stripped? You'd wanted so much to immerse yourself in the country, to be a part of it, to be truly Indian, and then suddenly one day when your citizenship was stripped, what did it mean?
I think there's a kind of level of trauma probably associated with it that I haven't fully dealt with because I was so afraid for myself in a certain way to do with a kind of survival as a writer. As my mother was like, it wasn't just family, it was just me and her. We were like it was almost the closest relationship, the closest friendship. And the idea that she would be getting old in India and I would not be able to visit her, and the sadness that it would bring to her, to my grandmother, I think that I kind of like, I don't know if I've ever reckoned with any of that. I felt that I was just, I felt a kind of anger. I felt that I'd been painted in a way I didn't like, but I also felt a tremendous wish to go on, to somehow survive as a writer, because I thought if that kind of weakness or that sort of the grief of what had happened creeps in, I felt it could spoil my life, you know, and I was very afraid that that would happen.
You write about it very evocatively in your book. You say to lose one's country is to know an intimate shame, like being disowned by a parent, turned out of one's own home. And you say citizenship is one of the few things we are allowed to take for granted. Without a country, we are adrift. Did you feel as if the anchor in your life had been cut off?
Well, you know, the wonderful German writer Sebastian Haffner has this thing about Germany where he says, I do not love Germany, just as I do not love myself. He's like, it's just my country. And there is this kind of a priori sense that one should be able to fall back on that. One of the beauties of belonging is that you can take it for granted. And it's what allows you to look hard at your place. It's what allows you to wrestle with what your country is. Like, you shouldn't be grateful to be who you are, do you know? And so what the government had done was that they suddenly tweaked this. And I was a petitioner. I was coming on a supplicant saying, well, actually, you know, this is my country. And they were saying no. And that's a very dangerous mechanism. I'm sure that many people in India who probably have a kind of inner migration, westernized Indians, Muslims, have had an experience or a shade of that experience. And it's a very ugly thing to do to someone. It's part of the majoritarianism of the government.
Let me ask you this. One's citizenship is part of one's identity. It's inseparable from who you are. But you actually were at birth a British citizen. At 2020, you became American. And yet anyone and everyone watching the interview today will automatically say, Aatish Taseer is Indian. So what does citizenship mean to you?
I mean, it's always been very, very complicated. At about 17 or 18, I remember with my stepfather having this conversation and saying to him that I wanted very much to give up my British citizenship and get an Indian passport. And he kind of talked me out of it. And he's like, no, you know, you're going abroad to study, you're going to find. And so it was a kind of like, there was a cynicism, I suppose, like a sort of taking the ease of being British. Maybe I shouldn't have done that, you know, but like, one has also lived through this era of convulsion. And so now I'm an American at a time when that has been weaponized. And a lot of people in this country are feeling a threat. They're talking about denaturalization. They're talking of, so we live in a kind of thuggish times, and citizenship is very much in the crosshairs of this generation of autocrats that we've been living under, because it is the most powerful, most effective way to make somebody feel vulnerable and to silence a critic.
Let's come to the other aspect of losing your citizenship, which you began talking about a moment ago, but I stopped you there. I'll bring it up now. You write, I felt strangely free. I felt relieved. The burden of trying to fit into India, of forever apologizing for its shortcomings, apologizing for my own westernization, was suddenly lifted from me. Can you explain that a bit more?
You know, I think we grew up, perhaps not for any fault of our own, in fairly westernized ways in India. To that, we added this other layer of probably a Western education. And we came back to India and we faced this tremendous pressure of authenticity, which is used all the time in India. You know, Amit Shah will say, these people who speak English, they will soon learn that they have to learn Indian languages. So this pressure for the real India, and you in some way being fraudulent because you grew up in a different way in India, I was very alive to that. And again, it was something that I felt it was distance that I felt I had to cover. You know, it was not that I thought, okay, here I stand and there they stand, and perhaps they should also meet the moment. They should cover a distance, because, you know, this idea of of an elite living in a bubble. Well, the people who constitute the real world or the real India or the real America, they also live in bubbles of a kind. And so there was this need to sort of make up for where history had left me. And then one day, all of that pressure, all of that need to belong was gone. And I was myself, with all the sort of idiosyncrasies, with all the curiosities, with all the sides of oneself that one hadn't developed for fear of being more marginal in India. All of that was suddenly, it kind of washed over me. And I felt the individual rising up rather than the person who was so desperate to be part of a group identity.
And yet the sad truth is, when you today write about India, you now use the past tense. There's a striking sentence in the introduction of your book where you say, India was my country. Is it hurtful to have to refer to India in the past tense?
It is extremely hurtful. It's extremely hurtful. And yet one just wants to be so clear-sighted. It's been 6 years. I think that I saw my grandmother, or I was witness to the absurdity of my grandmother, whose house I grew up in, just simply dying. And what do? You go to an Indian restaurant, you kind of try to remember her, but you don't have any rites of closure. You don't have the funeral. You don't have cousins gathering. You don't have that sort of thing. Again, stuff that one should take for granted, but you don't have any of that. So you live with a kind of absurdity. And now we've had my stepfather. Perhaps one day I'll have my mother, and what? Will a cousin call or an aunt call or someone say, well, she's gone too? And that's, I've had a weird life like that. I didn't have a real relationship with my father. I've had a lot of absurdity already. And if I don't kind of steel myself to the fact that this could be my situation in India as well, I don't want to be caught unawares. I want to be...
Sorry, carry on.
No, I just want to be as kind of thick-skinned and realistic about it, because I don't see the pressure letting up, and I don't want to be ambushed by yet another thing that I hadn't seen coming.
I ask this hesitantly, but is there a part of you that still wants to be Indian, or is that now firmly buried in the past? Have you closed that chapter, or do you still want to go back to the earlier pages?
I think there's an inviolable sense. I mean, I think there's a certain part that they can't touch. Like right now, I'm on this interview with you because I'm an Indian writer. When people respond to me or they respond to my work, they respond to me as an Indian writer. So as much as they would want to kind of deform the situation and make me seem like some rank outsider and a threat to the country, there's a certain part of my bond with India that they can't touch. And so, and certainly for a writer, that's a very powerful thing, because, you carry within you 30 years of that. Mom has this lovely thing where he says that sort of belonging that comes from, I don't know, knowing the nursery rhymes or the songs or the festivals or being kind of enmeshed in the language of a place. You can't really rob somebody of that. And so there is a part that's inviolable.
Before I end, Aatish Taseer, let me touch briefly on your father, Salman Taseer. It's because of him that you lost your overseas citizenship of India.
Right.
It's because of him that you haven't been able to get a visa to visit this country since 2019. What sort of relationship did you have with him? You touched on it earlier. Can you be a bit more fulsome?
Well, in the beginning, obviously, a very remote, distant figure who I would, people would come from Pakistan, they would tell me stories about him, but he was not somebody that I was ever able to give a kind of concrete reality to. So I made this journey to kind of banish the ghost of my father, to make him somebody real, somebody that wasn't a sort of present absence, as it were. And I did that. And the man I found, he was very patriarchal, very dominating, a very larger-than-life figure. And when he was killed, protecting a Christian woman accused of blasphemy, that courage that he displayed, that unwillingness to kind of be sort of cowed by the mullah or the TV personality, his sort of courage, that was very much of a piece with the man. But father to son, it was a difficult relationship. And again, it was a relationship where, having not been there, he suddenly arrived telling me what I should write and what I shouldn't write. And I didn't want to listen to him. You know, I was very much my own man. And so we were estranged at the end of his life. And as much as I admired the courage of the man, I remember V.S. Naipaul saying to me, I was talking about him probably in quite a rehearsed way. And Naipaul said to me, he said, "But your father was also your great enemy. So you must be relieved that he's gone." And it was just the kind of absolution that only a writer could offer, because it was such a strange, difficult feeling. But he was, of course, absolutely right. Because again, as very much in the case of country, that need to sort of fit in or belong to a parent, it also does diminish the individual. And once again, there was that curious sense of freedom.
Yes, absolutely. I was going to come to that because you mentioned it in your introduction shortly after you referred to what V.S. Naipaul said to you. You write, and I'm quoting, "I had tried so hard to be my father's son, suppressed whole sides of my personality only to run into futility, that it was a relief to no longer have to try. Yeah. He was gone and I was free." And it struck me because that thought, I was free, I felt relieved, is so similar also to half the response you had when you lost your citizenship of India. Yeah. Both lifted burdens from your shoulders.
I think probably a lot of people feel like that. When you live in a society where the interests of the group are as strong as they are in India, people do that all the time. The individual, with all the surprising sort of sides of an individual, that they're not always allowed to flourish. People try to make themselves small to fit in, and yeah, absolutely. I think that's not just a experience peculiar to me. I think probably a lot of people feel like that in India, don't you think?
You're probably right.
Yeah.
Because you echo that right through the introduction. This sense of a burden being lifted when you lost your citizenship.
I hadn't thought of it until now, but I suppose one of the things that I've always thought of this book as an act of survival, but it is also a very fierce defense of the individual.
It is indeed. And I'll end by referring to the essays in your book. You write, "If these essays feel like a return to self, it is because they represent the return of my natural curiosities, dare I say it, my cosmopolitanism, after the long night of cutting away parts of myself in order to better belong in India." And then very movingly you add, "The idea of home had gone. I stepped out into the world again." How has the world received Aatish Taseer?
I feel constantly, it's a funny thing, because this is Indian television, I want to say this, that the world has received me just fine, but a lot of my advantage comes from my Indian upbringing, that way of looking, that way of being in Mexico and understanding the pain of the pre-Columbian past, and those lines of tension that we have two or three of in India, British over Muslim, over Hindu, and of course the pre-Hindu past, which is a reality too. All of these little nodes that give you a feeling for history. It's so much the part of the richness of an Indian inheritance. And I've been able to apply that in the world beyond in this book. And so there's a great debt in a funny way.
But you're also saying something very moving. Citizenship or no citizenship, the Indian in you is ineradicable. It will always be there.
Yeah, it's a little bit like that kind of, that line from Camus where he says there's a kind of invincible summer within me in the depths of winter. And I think that sense of that Indian identity is like that. And of course it does include Pakistan as well, because that South Asian reality is so much bigger than the national boundary we've lived with for 80 years.
Absolutely. Aatish Taseer, I thank you for this wonderful interview. I thank you for talking so openly, so sincerely, so movingly about yourself, about India, about your father. And I'm going to hold up the book once again, because I do recommend that it's one that the audience should definitely buy and read. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you, Karan. It was such a pleasure to speak to you.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.